There's a path between North America and South Africa. It's the difference between night and day, light and dark. It's that gray area between here and there. And as a ham radio operator, you can enter the Twilight Zone.
I want to turn it to you. Is there anybody on frequency that wants to say hi to ZS1SBW? If there is, go ahead.
In 1960, when I was first licensed, I lived in Burbank. And at that location, I was on the side of the Verdugo Mountains, right at the DeBell Golf Course. And it was steep, sloped downhill, no chance of working Europe's short path. So I soon learned that I could turn my antenna towards the long path and work Europe and Africa. But what I didn't understand was why it would change. During certain months there'd be an opening to Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Well, of course, what it had to do with the position of the sun and how it moved across the planet with the seasons. In recent years, it's not been used much as a path to work DX. And KE5EE and Stan and ZS1SBW, Billy, have been on the long path almost every day, along with some other guys like K6MYC. And again, that's generating interest in the long path. I'm going to play a recording that Billy made of me. He held his cell phone up against his ICOM 7610 just to show you what a signal can sound like over the long path. And it's really pretty amazing. So here we go.
That is 3 Yankee, W6LG. Thank you. What a thrill to hear you and Billy, because my antenna is just at 28 feet. It's a small 3-element Yagi homemade on an 18-foot boom, 5.5 meters, with wide spacing to the director, 6 feet to the reflector, 12 feet to the director. And just put the thing together on the ground in a few minutes and stuck it up in the air while I could. Volker, thank you, and great to hear you. All right, I probably should turn to Mike, but because I'm not sure if Mike's hearing me, I'll say 73 all the way around, and and this is very reminiscent of the mid-1960s. So 73 guys, ZS1, SBW, and the group, W6LG.
Now during that exchange, K6MYC broke in on and transmitted at the same time I did to say that he could hear me fine. The thing to note is how much stronger he was than I was, and that has everything to do with our antenna systems. My antenna was relatively low. Mike's is very high. I think it's upwards of 90 to 100 feet. Believe it's a wide-spaced 5-element monobander, maybe with may have some 40-meter elements on it. Anyway, lots of gain, great location, downhill on the long path, and he's 10-20 dB stronger. Also, we've done some experimenting, and as you might expect, since my antenna is lower, my takeoff angle is higher. And as a result, my opening to Billy's ZS1SBW tends to be relatively short compared to Mike. So Mike hears Billy first, and then I do. Now I am west of Mike, so that's understandable. But his opening lasts longer, so I fade into the noise. Mike is still S9. Mike is hearing Billy, S9. I can't hear Billy anymore. And that's just the way things work. So I have to time my call to Billy to occur just as the band is beginning to open. My window of opportunity on some days is maybe 20 minutes. We did have an hour-long contact, but that was the exception. During one of my contacts with Billy, I asked if there was anybody else on frequency that wanted to say hi, and boy was this a surprise. So here we go, this next recording that again Billy made holding his cell phone up against the ICOM 7610. So listen closely.
Before I turn it to you, is there anybody on frequency that wants to say hi to ZS1SBW? If there is, go ahead. Yeah, Whiskey Delta 5 is Mobile in Oklahoma. Go ahead and see if Billy can hear you. Go ahead.
So WD5 IKX stroke Mobile breaks in from Oklahoma. Now in Billy's S meter, the WD5 was between S1 and S2, but perfectly readable because his audio had lots of highs. He's using an ICOM 706. The antenna on the back of the truck is the famous bug catcher, which has, I think, a coil diameter of about 8 inches. Really high Q. We've talked about high Q. And it covers a fairly narrow range, so the tap has to be moved if you move frequency. The installation is done just incredibly well. He's tied right to the frame, so he's got the frame. The truck was parked facing the right direction, so the signal will go towards the right front corner. So an amazing contact from Oklahoma, distance 17,000 miles. From California, I'll bring up the Earth, and I'll do that now. The gray line is, or the Twilight Zone as I prefer to call it, is not 180 degrees different from the short path. For example, the beam hitting to Billy from my place is 95 degrees. So in theory, if it was a 180 degree difference, it would be 275. It's not, it's 265. While that doesn't sound like a lot, it does make a difference. And again, it has to do with the way the sun shines on the Earth. It's a skewed path. And as you can see in this graphic, and I'll flip the planet over, the path is skewed just a bit. It's almost perfect right now between my place and Billy and Diane's place. We've had many contacts. Billy and Diane and I are friends, and we've talked many times, sometimes on Skype and Zoom. And that's one of the neat things about ham radio that I've talked about many times. There are 3 things. It's licensed radio service. It's a terrific hobby with all kinds of things. And it's also the friends that you make, like Billy and Diane. So this is the path. Now that gray line will move up Africa into the Middle East and eventually into Europe. So later, months later, there'll be great openings on the long path into Europe. So here's my location in Rocklin, California. If you look closely, you can see my 3-element Yagi attached to the back of the house. And it's pointed roughly at about 30 degrees, which is the beam heading for a lot of Europe. North end is this way. Long path Africa is about 270 degrees, so it's this way and up this hill. The top of the hill is about 50 feet higher, and it's, I think, about 300 feet over from the house. The height of the antenna is just 30 feet, so the takeoff angle is likely above that, but I don't have the advantage of the lower lobe, more than likely. Going towards Europe, there's no advantage. It's just relatively flat ground, despite how Google Earth portrays it. So let's back out just a little bit further. And again, you can see how the rising ground towards the long path is not helping me any. This is a shopping center with a grocery store and other stuff in it, or a drugstore and other stuff in it. So as you go further out, there's California, and I'm in the northern part, and let's go a little further here. Okay, now let's bring up the sun. And right now, local time is roughly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So let's go back to the day and time when we were doing the long path. Okay. So as I zoom in on sunrise or the Twilight Zone, where it's nighttime here, daytime here, and this is the gray line in between. This is with the gray line roughly over my location. To the other side of the planet, it's starting to become some sunset in the tip of South Africa. And that's roughly where ZS1SBW lives. Advance the time just a little bit right there. And that's 8:48 my local time. And let me go back towards California, follow that gray line. There we go. And so, okay, so here is about 8:48 my local time. And let's follow that gray line around the planet to the other side. And you can see it's just becoming sunset at the tip of South Africa. So that's that gray line path. There's also other paths, not just this one. So be aware that sometimes there's these odd openings, but if you look at the map, they may make some sense. For example, for us in California, there's an opening via the gray line to Asia. And sometimes during the year, there are openings to India, which are phenomenal. And that's a long way around. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, the Twilight Zone is a neat path. And again, it's that area between light and dark, day and night. And you can it's kind of like, maybe an analogy would be for a surfer who shoots that curl, that wave with his surfboard. We're just kind of putting our signal into that path, and off it goes. And as you could tell by the recordings of me and the guy Mobile in Oklahoma, it can be a phenomenal path. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. I'm trying to build a subscriber base. There's a good reason for doing that. I'd like to get to 50,000 and then eventually 100,000. Again, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, click the box for subscribe. The next video is going to be on a real simple device that I built, a field strength meter, which I think is pretty handy. 7.3, I'm Jim, W6LG in Rockland, California. And I can do long and short path. Not great, but I can do it. 7.3.